Greetings, fellow Gabriel fans. Lily White Lilith of lilywhite.com, along with my partner, Analog Mike Piera of analogman.com, here in front of Jerry Marotta's Dreamland Recording Studios in Woodstock, New York. We're going to go inside and check out his newest collaboration, a great process called the Security Project. Hey, welcome back to the analysis series. Lily White Lilith of lilywhite.com here, and we have got the estimable Jerry Marotta joining us on a very exciting project, the Security Project, which is revisiting his years with Peter Gabriel. First 5 albums on Peter's solo career, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Now, we understand that Peter was really trying to transition from his years with Genesis into a pretty much reinvented career as a solo artist, and he was so used to the collaborative project that it took him a while for him to really be able to come together on his own compositional stuff. And because he was like a former drummer, I hear that he often would rely on initial structure of drum grooves to be able to start composing. Was that your experience with him?
First of all, I started working with Peter after the first record. Mm-hmm. He had recorded the first record and done like a small promotional tour, and then I joined the band and toured with him on the first record. So I didn't play on the first record, which is still one of my favorite records of his. The one that I didn't do, but you know, he had a sort of unconventional way of working, and each record, as I think you probably know, the number one thing was that no 2 records were done or sound anything alike. So each record was like from the ground up, like reconstructing his approach to music and to writing, and oftentimes based on things that he'd either been reading or listening to, different kinds of music. So it's a very interesting, unusual process. Mm-hmm. You know, amazing. You know, amazing to see him and the way he works. So a lot of what we did and the foundations of this material was created in the studio, and I think very wisely so. I think he was gathering ideas and sort of data, and then we would get together in the studio and we would start jamming on stuff. And rarely do I remember there being songs written, full songs written, lyrics, melody, and structure. And if that ever happened, you can be sure that it wasn't long before we completely deconstructed. We deconstructed it and rebuilt it from the ground up.
So it was a group alchemy, wasn't it?
Very much so. Very much so. You know, initially, the key element, the element that changed the most was the guitar players. You know, when I started playing with Peter, it was Sid McGuinness. Mm-hmm. And then we had a guitar player named John Ellis, who was in a band called the Vibrators, in English. So he worked with us, and then eventually we ended up with a guy called David Rhodes, who he was playing in a band called Random Hold, and they opened for us on a tour, and that's how the whole thing started. And then David obviously became a big part of what Peter does.
Well, Tony Levin, Larry Fast, you, Robert Fripp to a certain extent. I mean, there were a couple of the guys who were bearing walls to Peter designing his own sound. And you and Sid came in on the second leg of that first tour in '77, August, which
That's
was
right.
Sightings in the Test Area in Autumn.
Is that true?
That was the name of it.
I
mean, the first part was Expect the Unexpected. And then the second leg was Sightings in this, you know, a typical
wild.
Gabrielism. You know,
I didn't know that.
To yourself, this is so eloquent, but
That's
what
funny.
the hell does it mean?
I never heard that.
Yeah.
I you know, but that's interesting, and that was a lot of fun. It was a great time for me. You know, I was in a band. I had just a band I was in just before that called Orleans, very different to Peter Gabriel. Yeah. So. And I actually didn't know who Peter Gabriel was I had never heard of him or Genesis. When I started playing with him, I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know who Genesis was. I mean, I just wasn't. I wasn't really into progressive music. I think that's why it worked so well. I think that's what Peter liked about me, because I wasn't a big fan of early Genesis stuff and then all the other prog bands, and I didn't come in with that approach. I came in with a very different approach. My background was strictly R&B black music. I grew up on that, and that's the kind of drumming that I was interested in doing.
And the progressive stuff was all English, uptight, to that beat, right? Whereas it had no swing. Whereas you brought in,
a sort of a swing and a simplicity to it that appealed to Peter, and ironically, very much appealed to Robert Fripp. And I didn't know who he was. I mean, but and everybody that spoke about Robert was almost afraid of him.
The professor.
Exactly. And but Robert and I we clicked from day one. Somehow. I mean, when I say clicked, that was a version of clicked. But it was very interesting, to work with them. And I think it was a great situation because I came from such a different background. Then there's Tony, who has like an extensive classical background and then an extensive jazz background.
Eastman School music.
And then he also is like a McCartney fanatic. So Tony's a freak. I mean, he has the ability to do so many things.
Cross genre.
So well and really with total sincerity. Not everybody, most people can't do that. But whatever it is he's playing, he plays it like it's the only thing he knows how to play.
Right.
So it's brilliant. And then, of course, Larry Fast was, I don't even know how to describe him. He was, again, like sort of the professor as well. I think
early synthesizer sequencer.
Yeah.
I mean, him and Wendy
Carlos.
Right. I mean, he was
sure.
Right
Bob
on those
Moog.
coaches.
I mean,
right.
He was in on the ground floor of all of that stuff. A real serious memory I have of Larry is we were at Ashcombe House, which is where we rehearsed with Peter, and they delivered a Prophet 5 to him, and I happened to be there, and I remember he took it out of the box, and he didn't plug it in. He just got a screwdriver and he opened it up. He just flipped it open, and I saw him. He tinkered around and he did something, and then he closed it up and he put the screws in it, and then he plugged it in and he started playing. It was like he just looked at it. The first thing he needed to do was dismantle it before he played it. Before he wanted to know what it sounded like, he really wanted to know
how it worked.
What was in there.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting.
Well, speaking of Ashcombe House, my collaborator, Mike Piera, analogman.com, he's got, he's the best of my technical side. And Ashcombe House was really the first home of the Fairlight CMI for Peter, at least his use. And
right.
So you were in on that initial ground floor because we know that Peter loves technology. Because
right.
His father was an engineer. He loved to bring in his mother's music, his father's engineering side. But the Fairlight, the early digital sampling.
That was the first one available, and when it seems when Peter learned about it, he wanted to get one of the first ones and make use of it, and he really did make great use of it.
I'm trying to think of which record that was on. It wasn't the
number 4.
It was the Security record, I think. Because
yep.
I associate that with David Lord, who was the producer and was also a keyboard player, and he was an engineer. He had a studio called Crescent in Bath, and I remember he told me quite a bit about the Fairlight, but the Fairlight was like it might as well have been developed by NASA. It was one of those things. Yeah. It wasn't, from what I understood, even though it was a keyboard and it looked like a musical instrument, it really wasn't about music. I think the BBC had There was very few people had them. I don't think any of them were musicians. And it was like a sound effects, sound design thing early on, where you could sample sounds into them and recreate them. And so that was Peter did get his hands on the Fairlight pretty early on.
Yeah. And
That was a very exciting period of time because technology really just blew open there.
That was right where analog started to turn into digital, and you started to be able to do a lot more powerful things.
Like Fairlight, there was a television monitor and a light pen where you could go like this on the screen and maybe affect the
terminals
waveform.
that had the pen, the light pen.
Exactly.
I used to make CAD/CAM systems using those.
And I think actually what was interesting is, they made those. Fairlight made those, and actually a few of them actually worked. I think most of them was like there was a lot of
much for that.
What's wrong with this thing? It's not working.
But since you were on the scene and seeing the very beginning, the genesis, forgive me, that's a bad pun, but that whole era started really at that ground zero, at least especially with Gabriel's stuff.
It would seem to have.
But you are not the technology kind of guy, because as a drummer, you're a very organically based musician.
Yeah.
And so how did you feel having this type of thing now as a presence, kind of pressing into a sphere that had never really been affected by? I mean, he was able to make percussive sounds and everything else that now started to delve in on your side of the thing.
Sure. Well, there's I don't know if you're familiar with the South Bank show, the famous South Bank show that it was a documentary about the making of the security record.
Oh.
And there's shots of Peter in a junkyard, like with the microphone, like
recording,
with
smashing things,
a television that like in a junkyard, crash, just like taking things, throwing them with running after with a microphone to record, all being with the idea that they would be loaded into the Fairlight, and then he could manipulate those sounds. So
how did you
was
feel about it, though?
I felt fine about it. I really didn't think much about it.
Yeah, it didn't affect your contribution.
No, not really. The drum machine obviously did.
Yeah.
But the
my
Fairlight
question
did.
about that is, Peter seems to be really into specific rhythms. Did he give you either drum machine programs or Fairlight programs that he wanted you to follow, or were they just a base and you created your own drum parts?
That's a good question, and it's one I really can't answer because I don't remember.
But I mean, you're the master of the groove.
I don't really remember exactly. I remember he got. The first thing I remember was he got this little drum machine. It was made by a company called Paya.
Remember those?
P-A-I-A.
They're usually kits.
Yeah, exactly. But it was this little funky little thing, and he had. I for some reason I want to say do do dee do dee do do dee do dee, which was Biko, I guess, right? But really a simple rhythm. But we started to play around with that. He started to fiddle with that, and then not too long after that, he had a big machine that was like this, and that was called a Linn drum, the Linn 1.
Yeah, he made great use of the Linn drums on the albums.
Right.
But now, how much did you have to do with did you actually do any Linn programming, or he did the programming himself?
I don't think I did much of the Linn programming. Not for him. I've done a lot of programming outside of Peter. But one of the things you have to remember is that we would work, and then we would work for some weeks at a time, but he would work forever.
Yeah.
And he was constantly tinkering and fiddling around with stuff. So he did that on his own. He liked doing that, and with David Lord or whoever. And then he had someone who was
all those guys.
Yeah. There were different people. Hugh was a phenomenal engineer. I'm not sure how much he wanted to stick around, and fiddle around with drum machines. He was too busy making other records. But he always had somebody like an assistant, somebody who was basically, local and willing to, it was their jobs to hang out there. And,
Well, you were at the very start, really, when it comes to it. Yes, there was a couple of months of touring after the initial album, but when it really got going on that steamroller that became such a very major career on Peter's part and on all of you who helped him really rise to a fully formed solo artist.
Right.
The technology was a good part of it, but it was really the tremendous talent of
Sure.
the people that he surrounded himself with. And you guys were from all different aspects of the industry.
Sure.
Now, in this security project that you're currently mooting, you are surrounding yourself with equally talented and creative beyond. You're all like masters, like Trey Gunn and Fuzzbee. All of you are tremendous when it comes to the outplay.
Well, they are.
No, you
I don't
are
know about
too.
me, but
Well, you're the ringmaster, my dear, of some.
well, it's a
outstanding
dirty job,
personalities.
but somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to,
So
it's
how did you
interesting.
come up with this idea?
About the end of last year, beginning, around New Year's, I just had this thought that I wanted to send an email out to David Rhodes, Tony Levin, Larry Fest, and Peter Gabriel. That it had been such a long time since we were in a room together playing music. And I really thought it would be an interesting thing. I had thought this quite a bit, and I've had conversations with Peter about it. After So, which was really at the end of my time with Peter, I felt a little disappointed with, I don't even know what the name of the next record was. Up or Us or Up Us or something.
2 letters.
It didn't quite seem right to me. I started working with Peter just after the first record, which I think is a phenomenal record. So there's the Fripp record, I think it's this one.
Scratch.
And then there's the Steve Lillywhite record, which is, this
Melt.
one. And so you could see the arc. But then Security was just, because we had worked together for so many years, and it was a great working combination. Security really was the beautiful, situation.
Culmination.
Exactly. And ironically, with So, we kind of started out, and I think it was the next generation it was the next phase beyond Security. Sadly, that didn't happen.
Right.
Not that it wasn't great that Peter made So, and it was such a big record for him, and it made him such a huge star. And of course, it's a phenomenal record. But what's interesting is we did a few versions of songs like Big Time.
Yeah.
That were much more in the style of Security, but like the obvious next step for these guys. And sadly, that didn't happen.
Didn't come to fruition.
It didn't. No, unfortunately, I ended up. Peter was going to make his record, and I had been hired to do a record with Paul McCartney, and they were kind of like back to back. And then at the last minute, Peter changed his plan, and he was going to do So at exactly the same time that I was going to do this record with Paul. Hugh Padgham was the producer. I was really the only musician on the record. It was Eric Stewart from 10cc and Paul and me. I couldn't really back out of that.
Not of McCartney.
No, and it wasn't because he's Paul McCartney. It was just, it really didn't matter who he was.
Right.
It just was, it wouldn't have been right. I mean, they had planned it for such a long time. So the work that I did on So was really, on the weekends, I went from Paul's place to Peter's. Mm-hmm. Robbing from Paul to pay Peter. Creatively robbing from Paul.
Right.
So
which
my
which
stuff
tracks
was
were those?
my things were limited. Well, we did Big Time.
Yeah.
We did a bunch of different things. Not that stuff did not make the record.
Mm-hmm.
Because the record, of course, what we did was not the Big Time that everybody knows.
Right.
So many different things happened for so many different reasons.
Right.
But that's the beauty of being in a band, and being, in a situation where if you're not feeling it, you can just get up and, get on your motorcycle and drive into town and leave the guys in the band to do whatever the hell they wanted to do. And that's the way we were.
It's usually so rooted in inspiration. And this project that you're doing right now is truly an inspiration because it came about just thinking about the 30th anniversary of Peter Gabriel's Plays Live album, obviously representing a fair amount of the catalog that you guys had worked together. And so, I just interviewed Trey Gunn, and he said, I didn't want to say yes to this project right off the bat, but I couldn't say no. And then as time went on, I still couldn't say no because I was intrigued.
Yeah.
And it must have simply gotten, bent within your DNA to start thinking about those times again and maybe bringing it back and then bringing it into technology is certainly much different than it was back then. And the instrumentation, I mean, even Trey playing the war guitar and true, Larry Fast is adding his sequences and sampling, etc.
Yeah,
but,
he's helping
he's
out.
working a lot with a lot more updated equipment, right? So
yeah.
I would say that this project really takes those original recordings that you did with Peter and makes them blossom even further in a very collaborative, creative process.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, yeah, obviously we're technology in the last 30 years has dramatically changed. But it's very interesting because in Peter's case, when you think of, and you listen to something like Family and the Fishing Net,
mm-hmm.
there's a lot of technology there, but there's so much more than that.
Well, unlike the electronic dance music you're hearing today, you guys are not going to be pressing a button. Everything we hear is going to be, other than maybe some loops in the background, everything we hear is going to be organically created.
This is, I think, honestly, I don't know if it's appropriate to say this, but I think that what happened after post-So, and I've actually spoken to Peter about this, and I don't really remember or want to say how he felt about it, but I think he suffered a bit from the technology because now technology was so overwhelming. It's one thing when you have a drum machine that's so simple and you can go boop boom boop 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 boom. Now there's like you have access to thousands and thousands of boom boom and thousands more of boom, boom, boom. It's like you can spend months trying to figure out what's the best.
All the sampling.
There's
what's
just
the
too
best
many crayons in his kit. And
I just think he got overwhelmed, and that's when it started to take him many, many, many years to make a record. And
because he had to go through each and every one of his crayons?
Yes.
In order to make sure that he had the right product?
I guess it's just, I think it overwhelmed him to the point where potentially the writing starts to suffer a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to Family and the Fishing Net, it's advanced to some degree, but it's also very simple, It's not super complicated, but it's really deep. I mean, I haven't listened to that music in a long time, so this has been very interesting to me. And first of all, starting to listen to it to remember what we were doing was very emotional, very exciting. It was funny. What's funny is like we've all had to do. We listened to the album version and the live version, and I mean some of these songs. There's one song where the chords are different. It's one thing that it's slower or faster or there's you extend a section, but to change the chords in the song from what was on the record to what you do live. I mean, that's
generational growth.
It's hysterical. And it's, I guess, in some ways, it's an indication of Peter and the fact that even after the record's done and the song is done, he's still working on it.
Yeah.
I think. What else could it be? He's still trying to make it better. And even though it's been recorded and it's kind of done.
But that's his blessing and his curse at the same time. I mean, he is such a perfectionist, and yet the types of things that he brings forth really are, in many ways, for those of us who have listened to him all these years, are deeply meaningful and perfect in their own way to us.
Right.
But for you, you were a part of the originator.
I was there for about 10 years.
Yeah. So this security project, how is it reflective? Are you bringing it down to the very core of the best of what those years were about?
Musically?
And personally? Emotionally?
You know what's great? I have nothing but fond memories now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when Scott and Norman first approached me, you know, I started thinking about it, and you know, I think there were good and bad feelings about it. Not terribly bad, but just, it's like any relationship. It's like a marriage. And so, you know, it's great. There's great things about it. And there's areas where you want to kill your spouse. And, of course, working with Peter, because he's so unusual in his approach. I mean, a great example is, I have a copy of a song that we recorded for the second record. And it's like a pop song. It's like a hit. It could be a hit record. So we recorded this song and we're listening to it. And Peter went, "That's really great. Now, we can't do that. Now let's do anything but that." And every and anybody else would just be like so happy to have found this groove, and it's poppy. The record company's gonna love this. You know, it's a pop song, and we did it, and we all had that sensibility. And then, but Peter was smart enough to go, okay, now that we got that out of our system, we got to do anything but that.
Yeah.
And I that's unusual.
Yeah.
There are not a lot of people do that, so I really appreciate that. Sometimes it can be a little difficult, as you might have witnessed today when we were rehearsing Flood. Mm-hmm. And it's the Peter influence in me where, you know, it was you know, war guitar and voice up until a certain point, and then the song gets big. We were trying to make it big during the solo. Mm-hmm. And then I had this thought to, like, the following chorus after this big solo was obviously to stay really heavy and hit it hard. And I said, well, why don't we bring it way back down again?
Just like Peter would do.
Well, yeah, I mean, and everybody was cursing me, just like we all cursed Peter whenever he came up with an idea. It's like, but this is so good. This sounds so good. Yes, it sounds good, but I think there's something more there than this.
Right.
Let's peel it back and then see what we come up with.
Well, I can assure all of our viewers that what Mike and I heard tonight with the rehearsals was enough to just raise the hair on the back of our necks and just melt us like butter.
Really?
I mean, it had a very magical layering of excitement and just pure bliss. So if you get to take in the security project with Jerry Marotta and Trey Gunn and Fuzzbee Morse and Josh Gleason and Larry Fast adding his synthesizers and sequences and all of the other people who are actually may join you in a jam, I highly recommend, we highly recommend that you do it. And we certainly
do they know
it.
You're rapping, aren't you?
Yes.
You're wrapping this baby up.
I want
These
you to
guys
look at
know
that camera.
that I'm just getting started. We could be here all night. I've
right.
put them to sleep and everybody else. But that's great that we're wrapping. But does everybody know when and where?
Tell us.
Do I know? I don't even know.
That's a good question. Tell us. Look at that camera and tell them.
It's BB King's.
More dates planned.
Many dates planned. Bring us to your barbecue, your fraternity party,
Bar mitzvah,
bar mitzvahs, funerals. We'll play it all. It's going to be
And
a really
beyond.
wonderful experience.
Jerry Marotta, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. And thank you for actually making this a project that pierces us to the heart.
Super.
Tell me